Alrighty, well, welcome back. We've had our first exam. Most of you were very successful in your grades, and I'm very pleased with the overall outcome. Uh, we're moving on now to chapter 5. It's called Making a Living. And this, again, is another central chapter in our studies. And I want you to familiarize yourself very well with the 5 adaptive strategies that are described and analyzed in this chapter, because it's very important for the rest of the book. So, for example, when we study the chapter on gender, it'll break down gender relations in terms of the 5 adaptive strategies. Also, when we look at other issues, again, it'll break it down for us along the lines of these 5 adaptive strategies. Very comparative, very useful in understanding human adaptation to the various environments throughout historical time. So if I had to choose the main topic of this chapter, though, there's other elements involved, other concepts to look at. For example, we're going to be looking at industrialization, which is our own time period. But also the chapter looks at the various forms of economic exchange, restitution, redistributive economies. But the main point for this chapter is these 5 adaptive strategies. A lot of your upcoming test material will be related to these 5 adaptive strategies, which are, well, first of all, before we name them, let's talk about the basic theoretical underpinning for the 5 adaptive strategies. What's the logic behind these? How are they related in a logical fashion? Well, we look at in the beginning of the chapter at what's known as Cohen's hypothesis, and he was interested in that different societies divided by thousands of miles may have similar cultural features, and so he wanted to find out what was the cause of this causal factor. And he came to see that it had to do with their economic base or their economic activities. And so he reasoned that societies, even though they vary, they may vary by space and even in time, will have similar cultural features if they have similar economic activities. And from this hypothesis, then he developed this the 5 adaptive strategies. He argued that the most important reason for similarities between 2 or more unrelated societies is their possession of a similar adaptive strategy. In other words, similar economic causes have similar sociocultural effects. So there's the hypothesis. Similar economic causes have similar sociocultural effects. So the economic base or mode will have a profound impact on shaping the culture of the society. And various societies around the world, they have similar economic types of activities. For example, like hunting or gathering, will display similar cultural features as well. That is, adaptive cultural features to that type of economic activity, even though these societies will also vary by culture characteristics as well, depending on particularities of their environment, for example. So go through here, and the main point for studying the 5 adaptive strategies is that you have some handle on the main characteristics of each of these. So you don't have to know all of the descriptions, but what are some of the main features that really distinguish one adaptive strategy from another? So, for example, the 5 adaptive strategies that we're looking at. The first one is the foraging societies, also known as hunting and gatherers. So those two terms are interchangeable: foraging societies or hunting and gathering societies. And then the second one is called horticulture. And then from horticulture, we have a watershed in human history called agriculture. And then from agriculture, we also talk about pastoralist societies, pastoralism. And then finally, looking at industrial society. For example, in looking at foraging societies, some interesting features is that until 10,000 years ago, all humans lived within foraging type societies. They're the oldest form of human societies. We began in societies together as hunters, meaning hunting wild game, and or foragers, foraging the local vegetation for roots and fruits and other things that could be gathered. Generally, the only division of labor in foraging societies is along gender lines. So the tendency was and is for males to be the hunters and females to do most of the foraging or gathering. And as we'll see in later chapters, especially when we get to the chapter on gender, we see how this plays out in a very complex fashion in terms of gender equality. And what kinds of societies do women have more social equality? And in what other types of foraging societies do they have less equality? And this plays out along whether or not the society leans more on hunting for their living or on the gathering aspect. Also, foraging societies were very ecologically adaptive. Very small groups of less than 100 individuals. They were nomadic, traveling in bands. If we had to ask, in what kind of human societies did we find the most social equality, then we would turn to the foraging societies, to the hunting gathering societies. Not because they were better people, but because of their economic necessity, because their way of life demanded a sharing economy. Reciprocity, a give and take. And so in that economy, they couldn't really afford to have a hunter, for example, to get a big head, an ego, saying, I'm the great hunter and you'll have to come to me for your provisions, because in the end, each family was responsible for doing their hunting. And of course, many times the males hunted in groups. But let's say, for example, one family had made a kill one day. They shared it with the rest of the group, so that in terms of reciprocity, the next time there's a kill by some other family in the group, they will share that back with the rest of the group. So there's this give and take, and that's how it was made possible to survive, was this sharing economy. So this produced a really sort of really cohesive social equality among the members. That is, there was not a lot of differential in terms of their statuses within the group. There was some mild status differentiations generally along gender lines. So the division of labor, again, in these types of societies was based along gender lines. The males did certain things, the females did certain things in making their living. And because of this, then there may have been some hierarchy, but very little. And so if we wanted to talk about what historical time period did we find the most human social equality, it would have been the hunting and gathering, foraging societies. An anthropologist I had for professor once made the comment that it's all been downhill ever since. Because as soon as we get into, especially agriculture really produces a lot of social inequality, as we'll see. So look at the correlates of foraging and for all the other adaptive strategies. look at the main characteristics, and I'll come back for some more on this topic in the next episode.